Long before the HOA ever slipped their warning beneath my door, something strange had begun brewing under my property, something I wouldn't understand until the very last moment of this entire ordeal. I didn't know it then, but the ground beneath my backyard was keeping secrets, secrets that hummed faintly beneath the soil like a warning I was too distracted to notice. It wasn't until the day the letter arrived that the hum grew just loud enough for me to hear. Only later would I realize that the sound had been there much longer than I ever imagined. It all started with the letter. It was folded sharply, slipped under my doormat with the kind of precision that suggested intent rather than convenience. The HOA emblem, gaudy gold and always smug, glistened at the top as if proud of its unnecessary authority. The paper felt heavier than normal mail, almost ceremonial, carrying an unspoken message. We own you. I opened it with mild annoyance, expecting another meaningless community update, maybe a reminder to trim hedges that were already trimmed. Instead, I found myself staring at a formal violation notice. According to the HOA, my grass had exceeded the community's height limit by exactly 1 inch, 7 inches instead of 6. The fine was laughably excessive, a borderline extortion attempt masquerading as neighborhood order. But what unsettled me more wasn't the fine. It was the last line on the page, printed in bold and framed with unnecessary seriousness. Tampering with community property is strictly prohibited and subject to further penalties. I reread that line several times. I hadn't touched any community property, barely interacted with my neighbors. I minded my own business, maintained my lawn, paid my dues, and stayed out of HOA nonsense whenever possible. So why include an ominous warning about tampering? Why print it in bold? And why attach it to something as trivial as grass height? The more I stared at that line, the more deliberate it felt, almost like an accusation preloaded before the crime had even been invented. I stepped outside to inspect my lawn, expecting to find overgrown chaos the HOA might actually have reason to complain about. Instead, the grass looked normal, healthy, trimmed, certainly not fine-worthy, and absolutely not justification for the tone of intimidation in the letter. But as I walked across the yard, something unexpected caught my attention. The soil vibrated. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable unless I stood perfectly still. But then I crouched, pressing my palm flat against the earth, and the sensation grew unmistakable. A low, steady humming resonated from somewhere deep underground. Not like a passing car or a neighbor's AC unit, but something mechanical, consistent, rhythmic. I shifted to another patch of grass. The vibration lessened. I moved back. It strengthened. This wasn't normal. My yard had never done this before. The HOA letter suddenly felt far more targeted than accidental. First the fine, then the warning. Now, this mysterious mechanical hum coming from beneath my property? It didn't add up. As I stood in the yard, trying to isolate the vibration's origin, movement caught my eye. 2 HOA board members stood across the street, whispering to each other while glancing deliberately at my home. When they realized I was watching them, they turned quickly and walked away in stiff, awkward strides. Their presence was too convenient to be accidental. That night, the hum returned, louder, bolder, as though something beneath the ground had grown restless. It pulsed slowly, almost methodically, vibrating my bedroom window, just enough to keep me awake. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that it was probably some old irrigation pipe struggling against age. But the HOA's strange warning gnawed at me. Why mention tampering? Why now? Over the next 2 days, new letters appeared. One addressed to me directly, another taped obnoxiously to my garage door. Both claimed the same violation, grass height. Both contained the same bolded warning about tampering with community property. And both arrived far too quickly to be routine HOA bureaucracy. This wasn't enforcement. This was pressure. The more they pushed, the more suspicious I became. By the 3rd day, I decided to recheck the area where the humming was strongest. As I dug my fingers gently into the dirt, feeling for the vibration, I uncovered something unusual. The soil felt recently disturbed, loose in texture, slightly uneven in color. not like the rest of my yard, almost as if someone had dug there recently and covered it up. My mind immediately flashed to the image of the two board members standing across the street the day before. Had they been watching me because they knew something was beneath my yard, something they didn't want me to discover? And was the grass height fine nothing more than an excuse to push me into compliance, hoping I wouldn't notice the ground shifting beneath my feet? The fine itself suddenly became irrelevant. What mattered was the hum, the disturbed soil, the pattern emerging from these subtle but deliberate actions. The HOA wasn't afraid of tall grass. They were afraid of what lay underneath it. I tried to ignore it, to let it go. After all, maybe it was imagining things. Maybe the board members weren't watching me. Maybe the vibration was just an old pipe, and the warning was standard legal jargon. But the thought of ignoring something that seemed deliberately concealed kept me awake through another night of faint, mechanical humming. Sleep finally came in fragments, thin and uneasy. But by early morning, my decision was clear. If the HOA didn't want anyone tampering with community property, that meant something on my land belonged to them, something they thought they had successfully hidden, something they didn't expect a homeowner to question, something they feared I might uncover. I grabbed a shovel from the garage, the early light casting long shadows across my yard. The hum was louder than the day before, vibrating through the ground with a strange persistence. With each step toward the disturbed patch of soil, the warning in the letter replayed in my mind like a threat echoing from beneath the surface. But I had to know. I didn't yet realize that digging into that patch of earth would unravel a conspiracy buried deeper than any of us imagined. That the hum beneath my yard wasn't just noise. It was the heartbeat of an illegal secret the HOA had spent years hiding. A secret that would shake the neighborhood, the city, and eventually the very ground beneath us. At the time, all I knew was this. The HOA fined me for grass height, and the earth beneath my lawn was humming. And I was about to find out why. The morning after I finally decided to dig, the neighborhood seemed unnaturally still. There was no chatter of early dog walkers, no passing cars, not even the usual chorus of sprinklers activating across the property line. It was as if the entire community was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. The letter from the HOA warning me not to tamper with community property pulsed in the back of my mind like a mental alarm. But the hum beneath my yard, the low mechanical thrum I had heard for days, was louder now. It no longer felt like something buried deep beneath the surface. It felt alive, shifting, vibrating steadily through the soil as if responding to my presence. When I placed my palm against the grass, the earth trembled faintly beneath it. I grabbed a shovel from my garage, its old metal edge scratched from years of harmless gardening. The tool felt oddly significant in my hands now, heavier than ever, as if weighed down by the consequences of what I was about to do. I walked toward the patch of soil where the ground had felt disturbed. The morning sun illuminated the spot, casting a long shadow over the uneven earth. The first shovel of dirt lifted easily. Too easily. The soil was loose, freshly moved. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. Far more recently than the HOA claims that I had violated any landscaping rule. I dug again, deeper this time, the hum growing stronger as I displaced the soil. Soon the vibrations weren't just in the ground. They buzzed faintly through the shovel itself. Then came a metallic sound. A sharp, unexpected clink echoed through the hollow beneath my yard. I knelt immediately, scraping away dirt with my hands until a metal surface revealed itself. It was flat, rectangular, and clearly manufactured. No part of it belonged naturally beneath a suburban backyard. Dust and old soil concealed its edges, but as I brushed it aside, the shape became unmistakable, a hatch. A buried access hatch with hinges partially rusted and bolt heads half concealed under decades of dirt. My heart hammered in my chest. There was no reason for a hatch to exist beneath my yard. Not an old irrigation hatch, not a utility connection, nothing. Yet here it was hidden under barely 8 inches of soil, and the HOA was desperately trying to prevent anyone from discovering it. The hum vibrated through the metal, stronger than anywhere else. Whatever lay beneath wasn't dormant machinery. No, it was running. Active. Operating beneath the entire neighborhood without any homeowner's knowledge. I slipped my fingers under the ridges of the hatch and tugged. At first, it resisted, stuck from years of being buried. But with a deep breath and one final pull, it lifted enough for a gust of cold air to rise from the depths below. The air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something mineral-like. Industrial. Inside the hatch, a ladder descended into darkness. Faint lights flickered far below, glowing weakly like dying fireflies. The hum was louder now, reverberating like the steady breathing of some underground beast. I took one last glance around my yard. No neighbors were outside. No HOA cars were patrolling, at least none I could see. And yet I felt watched, as if the walls of the homes around me had eyes waiting for me to climb down. I gripped the ladder and descended. The narrow shaft swallowed me quickly. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. After several rungs, my feet hit solid ground. I stepped into a chamber that stretched wider than I expected, far larger than anything the HOA could claim was routine maintenance. Dim industrial wall lights buzzed sporadically, illuminating long pipes running along the ceiling and walls. The sound I'd felt from above was clearer now, a steady pumping mechanism, thumping rhythmically like a massive machine, inhaling and exhaling. It was a well system, an active, concealed, and clearly illegal well system. I walked carefully down the corridor, its concrete floor surprisingly clean for something hidden underground. Along the walls, faded labels marked pipes that branched into multiple directions. Some indicated pressure lines, others water routes, others carried strange shorthand codes I couldn't decipher. But the most startling part was the newer equipment, gauges, pressure valves, patchwork repairs that appeared recent. This wasn't abandoned infrastructure. It was maintained, actively used. Someone had been down here often. As I ventured further, I saw a side chamber with a stack of plastic bins and metal shelves. A binder lay half-tucked into a rusted cabinet drawer. Its spine read, "Property Assessments, Unauthorized Use." The words chilled me. Unauthorized? Property assessments? What did that even mean in this context? I reached for it. Before I could touch the binder, a sudden echoing clang rang out above me, the hatch slamming shut. My entire body tensed. Footsteps clattered against the metal rungs of the ladder. Not one pair, two. I stepped back into the shadows of a narrow corner where the pipes were thicker. The vibrations from the machinery masked my breathing as I pressed myself close to the wall. The first figure descended, then another, their silhouettes outlined by the dim overhead lights. As they reached the floor, their shifting clipboards reflected just enough light to reveal the HOA logo printed across them. 2 board members, the same 2 I had seen near my yard days earlier. They didn't whisper this time. They didn't move casually. Instead, they paced the chamber quickly, their posture tense and urgent. One inspected the gauges with quick, agitated movements. The other scribbled notes on a form, repeatedly shooting glances toward the tunnel that led deeper underground. Their body language told me everything. They were worried. Something was wrong with the system. Something was failing, and they knew someone had discovered the hatch. One member knelt beside a pressure valve, banging on it with a tool as if trying to reset it. Another alarm light blinked weakly, casting red reflections across their faces. They muttered in frustration, tapping rapidly on their clipboards. I tried not to breathe too loudly. The binder I had nearly opened before spotting them felt like a magnet pulling my attention. What secrets did it contain? Why was it labeled unauthorized use? And why did the HOA bury a well system beneath the neighborhood? Questions spiraled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. After several minutes of frantic inspection, both board members moved down the corridor into another chamber, their voices fading with each step. The moment they disappeared, I slipped out of hiding and moved rapidly toward a different tunnel, the farthest one from where they had gone. My instincts screamed at me to escape now, before they returned. I followed the tunnel until I found another ladder leading upward. Unlike the first hatch, this one was sealed from above. But time had warped the screws, and corrosion weakened the hinges. With effort, I pushed. The hatch groaned, metal grinding against metal, but eventually gave way. Fresh air rushed in. I climbed out behind a hedge in a community common area, a place rarely visited except during summer picnics. I closed the hatch quietly behind me, brushing dirt over the seams. The neighborhood looked normal, almost eerily peaceful. No one suspected what lay beneath their feet. No one knew the HOA was hiding industrial machinery under their homes. But the most alarming sign waited for me when I returned home. At the edge of my driveway sat a black SUV. Its windows were tinted impossibly dark. Its engine was running, and although I couldn't see their faces, I could feel it. The HOA wasn't just suspicious. They knew. The black SUV in front of my house did not move for the first 10 minutes after I arrived home. It idled silently, dark and uninviting, like a lurking predator studying its prey. Though I could not see who sat inside, I felt their eyes fixed on me with sharpened suspicion. The crisp air carried an unnatural stillness, broken only by the faint humming beneath my lawn. A hum I now knew was not merely a curiosity, but part of a sprawling network of underground machinery the HOA had tried to bury both literally and metaphorically. I stepped into my house and eased the curtains shut, not daring to turn on any lights. The SUV remained stationed in front, its tinted windows absorbing the afternoon sun, while its engine rumbled faintly in a way that signaled patience, not haste. Whoever sat in it wasn't simply monitoring the street. They were monitoring me. But I had no time to be paralyzed by fear. I needed answers. With a steady breath, I spread the photos I'd taken underground across my kitchen table. Images of the hatch, the pipes, the valves, the unauthorized system, the binder I'd almost been able to reach. Each picture painted a clearer picture of the HOA's hidden operations. The evidence was scattered but undeniable. Yet what unsettled me most was the machinery's condition. The pressure gauges, the leaks, the frantic behavior of the board members. It all pointed to instability. The system was failing, and failing fast. While I studied the images, the hum beneath my floorboards pulsed with new urgency, a low vibration growing slightly louder with each passing hour. The tunnels were alive with mechanical strain. A system under pressure was a system preparing to break. When the SUV finally drove away, I exhaled in relief. But the relief was short-lived. Not long after it vanished from my street, another HOA letter appeared on my doorstep, tucked into the seam of my door in a way too precise to be coincidence. I opened it carefully, half expecting another ridiculous fine. Instead, it was a courtesy notice informing homeowners that the HOA would be conducting a community-wide landscaping inspection the following afternoon. The phrasing suggested routine maintenance, but the timing was far too convenient. The board was preparing for something, perhaps looking for signs of disturbance, perhaps verifying if any other hatches had been uncovered. They were searching for damage, or panic, or both. Night fell slowly, dragging shadows across my yard. I wanted to sleep, but my mind replayed the underground chambers over and over. The dimly lit corridors, the strange codes on the pipes, the binder that nearly slipped into my hands, the two board members scrambling to keep the system functional. I knew I needed to go back underground. I needed that binder. Whatever information it contained might be the key to exposing the entire scheme. The street was quiet. No SUV. No patrolling HOA trucks. The neighborhood slept under the illusion of safety. I grabbed my flashlight, a backup battery, and a small camera before heading to the backyard. The hatch was still buried beneath a thin layer of soil, but I had memorized the exact spot. I brushed the dirt aside, lifted the hatch slowly, and descended once again into the cold subterranean world. This time, the hum was louder, resonating through the concrete walls like the distant roar of machinery on the brink of failure. The air was colder as well, and moisture clung to the steel pipes, forming beads that dripped rhythmically onto the floor. I walked deeper through the main chamber, careful to stay quiet as the echoes of my footsteps bounced off the walls. The repair tools the board members had used earlier were still scattered across the floor like abandoned medical implements left beside a dying patient. A pressure gauge still blinked red intermittently, an alarm trapped in its own cycle, unable to trigger beyond the buried chamber. The binder cabinet sat exactly where I last saw it. The property assessments, unauthorized use, labels still visible from the damaged hinge. My heart pounded as I pulled it open. Inside were stacks of papers, crisp and meticulously organized. Charts, signatures, handwritten notes, records dating back nearly 2 decades. The early pages documented water extraction levels, pressure maintenance schedules, and unauthorized pump expansions. The more recent pages showed a disturbing pattern of increased water output, as if the HOA had grown greedy, drawing more than the system could safely manage. Then I found the ledger that changed everything. Tucked beneath a stack of repair logs was a worn leather-bound book. Inside were names, homeowners, board members, contractors. Next to each name were cryptic annotations. Gallons moved, gallons billed, gallons diverted. Some entries listed payments. Others listed warnings. And at the bottom of the most recent pages, several entries had been hastily crossed out, as if the record keeper panicked at the idea of them being discovered. One line stood out more than any other. Pressure risk acceptable. Collapse probability minimal. It was dated only 3 weeks earlier. Someone on the board had evaluated the risk and determined the neighborhood could survive a potential failure. A chilling thought seized me. Collapse probability? This wasn't just about illegal wells and water theft. This was about infrastructure being pushed to the edge of structural integrity. A catastrophe waited beneath us, ready to open the earth without warning. Before I could process the implications, a sound echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the main entrance. I froze, but this time, only one set of footsteps echoed through the chamber, and the rhythm was different, heavier, more cautious. Whoever was approaching wasn't here for maintenance. They were searching. I switched off my flashlight and slipped between the pipe conduits, crouching low. The footsteps crept closer, pausing occasionally as if listening. A faint beam of light flickered, reflecting off the metallic surfaces. The silhouette of a person appeared in the corridor, scanning the chamber carefully. Whoever knew someone had been down here. My pulse hammered. The tunnel was too narrow to escape without being seen. My only choice was to duck deeper into the network of pipes winding through the chamber. I slipped into a side corridor, moving slowly, careful not to splash through puddles or brush against metal. The deeper I moved, the quieter the footsteps became, until they were replaced by the distant hiss of stressed pipes. As I continued, I noticed something new. The foundation walls were beginning to crack. Thin fractures lined the concrete, spreading like spiderwebs. Water seeped through the fissures, glimmering under the dim lights. The system was deteriorating faster than the board anticipated. The hum of machinery now resonated like the groaning of a massive creature straining against its own weight. The vibrations rippled through the floor. Every pipe shuddered. I needed to escape with the ledger before the entire structure gave way. But when I reached the ladder leading to the secondary hatch, I hesitated. Something was different. The ground above the hatch was shifting, faintly but unmistakably. Soil was falling through the cracks, dusting my shoulders like the earliest warning of an impending collapse. The pressure was worsening by the minute. I climbed quickly, shoved the hatch upwards, and crawled into the common field. The night's air hit my face like a sudden blessing. I replaced the hatch carefully, brushing soil over it before retreating into the shadows. And as I made my way back home, clutching the ledger tightly against my chest, I saw the SUV again, slowly rolling down the street toward my house, almost as if it could smell the secrets I carried. The HOA knew someone had been underground, and now, with the ledger in my hands, I had no doubt. They suspected it was me. By dawn, the ledger I had taken from the underground chamber lay open across my dining table, its yellowed pages exposing decades of secret extraction, concealed maintenance logs, and coded references I had yet to decode. Every page confirmed what I feared. The HOA wasn't just a meddling group obsessed with lawn height and paint colors. They were running a clandestine water operation siphoning resources through a network of hidden wells that were never meant to be tapped, let alone expanded. But the more unsettling realization was this. The system was failing, and the board knew it. The cracks in the tunnel walls, the way the pipes trembled, the crossed-out entries, the desperate behavior of the board members, the calculations on collapse probability. They knew, and they still kept the system running. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across my driveway. And on that driveway, taped boldly across my garage door, was a new violation notice. This one printed in aggressive red ink, far harsher in tone than any I had received before. When I pulled it down, the accusations hit me one by one like blows. Non-compliant landscaping, unapproved exterior modifications, failure to maintain community aesthetic, noise disturbance, improper use of tools, unregistered activity after hours, suspicious behavior. Every accusation was entirely fabricated. Not a single one had any basis in reality. The list wasn't written to enforce rules. It was written to overwhelm, intimidate, and punish. They weren't hiding their intention anymore. They wanted to bury me under fines and fear until I stopped asking questions. As I stepped back from my garage, I noticed 3 neighbors watching from a distance. Their expressions ranged from confused to wary. Someone had clearly told them something untrue, something damaging. The HOA had already begun controlling the narrative. To them, I was no longer a quiet homeowner. I was a problem. Minutes later, a white HOA enforcement truck rolled slowly down my street. It paused at the edge of my driveway long enough to make its presence known before continuing. The message was clear: we're watching. But the hum beneath my house didn't care about HOA theatrics. It vibrated through the foundation with greater urgency now, like a ticking clock counting down to a moment no one could see coming. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet, as though the earth had begun shifting in anticipation of what lay below. I returned inside and flipped through more pages of the ledger. The coded entries began making sense. The HOA wasn't just siphoning groundwater for community irrigation. They were diverting massive quantities for off-site use. Construction companies, private contractors, and even external landscaping businesses were being supplied with water extracted illegally from beneath our neighborhood, paid quietly under the table. Every homeowner fee, every community water maintenance charge, every landscaping fine, it all fed the covert operation. The money poured into maintenance of the illegal system instead of legitimate community improvements. And yet the system was on the verge of collapse. Around noon, another vehicle appeared, a black sedan with no plates. It crawled to a stop across the street from my home. 2 men stepped out, wearing plain clothes but carrying clipboards. Their demeanor mirrored the HOA board's controlling posture. They surveyed my lawn with exaggerated seriousness, occasionally glancing at my windows as if waiting for me to peek out. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They only observed before driving off. The HOA wasn't acting alone anymore. They brought in outside help, perhaps private investigators, perhaps hired enforcers. The deeper I dug into their secrets, the more aggressive they became. By late afternoon, the humming beneath the soil grew significantly louder. While standing in my backyard, I felt the vibration more distinctly than ever before. It rolled through the ground like a distant engine revving beyond its threshold. The earth's surface trembled subtly, as if reacting to pressure building within hidden chambers below. When I knelt near the hatch, I noticed something new. The soil around it had shifted again. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone had accessed the hatch after I left. Whether they had gone down to repair something or simply to check for signs of intrusion, I couldn't be certain. But the evidence was clear. They knew the hatch was no longer hidden. The thought tightened my chest. The board was not only aware of the breach, they were responding to it. Inside the house, I decided it was time to involve authorities. If I didn't act soon, the ground beneath us could give way at any moment. The ledger alone was damning enough, but combined with the photos, videos, and the structural instability I'd witnessed underground, it was undeniable. The HOA could no longer hide their operation. I opened my laptop and started drafting a detailed report for the Environmental Authority. I attached every piece of evidence I had, The photos of the hatch, images of the pipes and machinery, the ledger scans. I outlined the risks of structural collapse, the illegal extraction, and the danger posed to every resident. As I typed, the house vibrated softly, barely noticeable but consistent. The wells were under strain, and the more pressure built, the closer the disaster loomed. Before I could complete the report, a sudden pounding rattled my front door. 3 heavy knocks, followed by silence. My heart jumped. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Standing on my porch were 3 HOA board members dressed in their official vests, clipboards clutched like weapons, expressions sharp with forced authority. Their posture conveyed a rehearsed confidence, as though they expected me to open the door on command. I didn't. I stood perfectly still, watching them through the peephole. The middle board member shifted uncomfortably, tapping his foot. Another wiped sweat from his brow. None of them spoke. They simply waited, rigid and unmoving. Minutes passed. The tension grew. Eventually, they turned slowly, retreating to the edge of the driveway where they engaged in a hushed but heated conversation. Their glances darted constantly toward my house, their anxiety unmistakable. I realized then something important. They were scared too, not just of exposure, not just of me, but of what was happening beneath us. The pressure, the instability, the risk, everything was escalating. And the HOA, despite all their bluster, had no real control over it anymore. Night fell more heavily than usual, cloaking the neighborhood in uneasy silence. The hum beneath my house throbbed like a warning. My laptop screen glowed as I finished the report and prepared to send it. But before I could hit submit, something rustled inside my mailbox. A soft thud echoed through the quiet street. I stepped outside cautiously, the air carrying a faint metallic tang, almost like the smell of the underground tunnels. I opened the mailbox. Inside was a single plain envelope. No return address, no markings, just one photograph. A photograph of me, underground, standing near the binder shelf. Someone had filmed me in the tunnels. Someone inside the tunnels knew I'd been there. And now they wanted me to know that they knew. The photograph in my mailbox felt heavier than paper. The moment I held it, cold realization spread through me like a slow-moving toxin. Someone had been watching me from inside the tunnels. Someone who knew exactly when I was down there, what I had seen, and how close I had come to exposing everything. The picture was grainy, but unmistakably me, reaching for the binder in the dim glow of the underground lights. The message was unmistakable. Stop now, or the consequences will escalate. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. The walls felt thinner than usual, the windows too exposed. I closed the blinds, one after another, shutting out the world. But shutting out the world didn't silence the problem. The hum beneath my house had evolved into something deeper, more urgent. A low, throbbing pulse that vibrated through the floorboards like a warning drumbeat. The entire underground system was straining, and the HOA's desperation was rising with it. I spread the ledger pages across my table once more. For the first time, patterns emerged, connections between names, dates, and gallon counts. The HOA hadn't just been siphoning groundwater. They'd been expanding the extraction every year, pushing the old illegal infrastructure beyond its capacity. And the more they extracted, the less stable the tunnels became. The ledger's most recent entry made my stomach twist. Output increased to meet external demand. Risk acceptable. Risk acceptable. The phrase haunted me. Acceptable to whom? Certainly not to the homeowners living above hollowing earth. By mid-morning, the HOA had escalated their retaliation. A fresh batch of violation notices littered my porch, weighted down with a clipboard left deliberately behind. They fined me for improperly stored gardening tools, excessive shade on exterior windows, and failure to maintain uniform curb appeal. Each accusation was more absurd than the last, constructed out of thin air. They weren't just building a case. They were building a paper wall of intimidation. Soon after, the black SUV returned. This time, it parked directly across the street, engine humming, windows gleaming black. Whoever was inside didn't try to hide their surveillance. They wanted me to know I was being observed. Inside, my house felt smaller with each passing hour as I prepared the full report for the environmental authorities. The evidence was undeniable now. Photographs, videos, ledger pages, pressure readings, and structural instability warnings. Everything pointed to an impending catastrophe. The ground beneath the community wasn't stable. As the afternoon sun sank slowly toward the horizon, a sudden flicker coursed through my living room lights. Then another. And then, abruptly, the power in my home cut out. Not the neighborhood, just my home. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I checked the breaker panel. Nothing was tripped. I checked the exterior service box. The meter had been tampered with. The HOA had cut my power. For a moment, darkness swallowed everything. No lights. No hum from the refrigerator. No digital clock glow. But the one sound that remained, faint but undeniable, was the humming beneath the soil, vibrating stronger than ever. I grabbed a portable battery and powered my laptop. If they thought cutting the power would stop me, they underestimated my determination. The report needed to be submitted. But as I typed, a new sound echoed from beneath the foundation. A thud, followed by another. Then a low, grinding groan. A pipe had ruptured underground. The ground trembled slightly under my feet. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The hum faltered, then surged again in a frantic, uneven rhythm. The well system was deteriorating rapidly, far more rapidly than the HOA was prepared for. Outside, neighbors began gathering on sidewalks, confused by the vibrations. Some pointed at the ground, others looked toward the HOA office building. Panic brewed beneath their uncertainty. The HOA emerged from their small office soon after, trying to calm residents with rehearsed gestures and forced smiles. But their strained posture betrayed their anxiety. The situation was slipping out of their hands. I returned to my laptop and attached the final piece of evidence. A video clip I had recorded the night I revisited the tunnels, showing tremors rattling the pipes and cracks forming in the walls. It was undeniable proof of imminent danger. Just as I prepared to send the report, an engine roared outside. Not the SUV, something larger. I peered through the blinds. The HOA president himself stood in the middle of the street with two board members flanking him. Behind them, several more HOA vehicles lined the road. Their presence wasn't routine, it was orchestrated. They were preparing to confront me directly. They approached my front walkway with purposeful steps. Their clipboards were gone. Their expressions were no longer bureaucratic. They were fearful, suspicious, cornered. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I watched through the smallest slit in the blinds as they knocked. The sound echoed like a blunt warning through the powerless, quiet house. They waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5. Then, as the ground trembled slightly once more, their composure cracked. The HOA president's calm facade broke open beneath the pressure of something far larger than me, a system failing beneath his authority. They backed away slowly, glancing toward the neighborhood's outer perimeter, where a thin plume of dust rose near the fence line. Something underground had shifted again. The collapse was beginning. I seized the opportunity. I transferred the report to a portable drive and grabbed my car keys. If the HOA had cut my power, they wouldn't stop at that. I couldn't rely on my home's internet or electricity. The report had to be delivered physically. But when I opened the door to leave, I froze. Standing at the curb, partially illuminated by the dimming evening light, was the black SUV again. The silhouette of the driver turned slightly in my direction. It wasn't just watching, it was blocking the road. Before fear could take hold, a sudden tremor ripped through the neighborhood. The ground shook violently for several seconds. Dogs barked. People shouted. A muffled roar echoed from somewhere below the street. A pipe had fully burst. In the chaos, the SUV jolted, repositioned itself, and for the first time since it appeared, drove away in haste. This was my chance. I ran to my car and sped out of the driveway, the portable drive burning like a brand in my pocket. Behind me, the HOA board members scrambled across the street, shouting orders at one another while the earth continued shaking beneath their polished shoes. In my rearview mirror, The community's streetlights flickered as more tremors rippled through the ground. Several yards sagged inward slightly, as if something massive below had shifted violently out of place. The HOA president watched my car vanish down the road, his expression twisted with something between fear and resignation. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. The farther I drove from the neighborhood, the more the trembling diminished. But the dread didn't. It trailed behind me like a heavy shadow, pressing against the back of my mind. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear, half fearing I'd see the earth split open behind me. But the road stayed dark, empty, and still. Miles away from the HOA's reach, I pulled into a dimly lit convenience store parking lot. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, casting a pale glow across my dashboard. Here, far from the underground machinery, the air felt different, steady, unmoving, safe. For the first time in days, I took a full breath. I opened my laptop, connected to the store's public Wi-Fi, and plugged in the portable drive. The report filled my screen piece by piece. Photos of the illegal wells, the ledger pages, the pressure gauges nearing catastrophic red, the trembling pipes, the cracks in the tunnel walls, the suspicious surveillance, the retaliation, the fabricated fines, the evidence of tampering, the photograph of me taken underground by an unknown watcher. All of it formed a damning portrait of a system built on secrecy and greed. I didn't hesitate. With one click, I sent the full report to the state's Department of Environmental Safety, the County Water Authority, the Fire Marshal's Office, the State Attorney General's Hotline, and 2 investigative journalists known for exposing government corruption. The files transferred quickly through the weak Wi-Fi. Each sent confirmation felt like a step toward freedom. For the first time, the truth was out of my hands and protected. But the story wasn't over yet. I stayed in the parking lot long enough to confirm multiple servers had received the evidence. Then I started the car and drove toward a safer location, a hotel near the city center. I needed distance, and I needed to rest. But I knew the final chapter of this nightmare was still unfolding back where I had lived. The earth beneath the HOA neighborhood had been groaning under pressure for too long. It wasn't going to wait. By morning, the news began spreading across local channels. My phone, charged overnight at the hotel, lit up with alerts. Unexplained ground collapse in suburban development. Multiple homes evacuated. Environmental authorities investigating. Possible infrastructure failure beneath residential community. The headlines came rapidly, each one more alarming than the last. Aerial images showed the truth with brutal clarity. Several lawns had sunk into shallow depressions. Driveways had cracked down the middle, and the community's outer field had caved inward in a jagged crescent shape. A maintenance shed near the HOA office had collapsed entirely, revealing twisted steel pipes beneath it. The illegal wells were no longer hidden. In the footage, fire crews surrounded the area, instructing homeowners to stay away from the perimeter. The ground continued to shift intermittently, small tremors sending ripples through the soil. At the center of the activity, investigators wearing hard hats and reflective vests descended through a partially collapsed surface section, entering the tunnels, now exposed. The HOA board members were nowhere to be seen on camera. By noon, another alert appeared, this time from one of the journalists I'd contacted. They had received the report. They had reviewed it, and they wanted to interview me. But the larger breaking news overshadowed everything. State investigators discover unpermitted water extraction system beneath HOA neighborhood. The footage showed officials holding damaged filtration pumps, corroded pipes, and illegal valves caked in rust and mineral deposits. They displayed the ledger, my ledger, sealed in a transparent evidence bag as officers escorted it toward an environmental crimes unit van. Its worn leather cover looked strangely small compared to the impact it had just unleashed. Authorities explained that the HOA had siphoned groundwater for years, decades even, diverting thousands of gallons for unauthorized commercial contracts while masking the operation as community irrigation maintenance. The wells had been built piecemeal, hidden under landscaping budgets, and expanded without oversight. Their neglect had weakened structural supports beneath the neighborhood, and their greed had pushed the system past its breaking point. The collapse wasn't an accident. It had been inevitable. And still, the final piece to the puzzle hadn't been revealed. I watched as cameras followed investigators deeper into the tunnels. One clip showed them discovering a small surveillance room, cramped, dimly lit, filled with outdated monitors and tangled wiring. Screens displayed grainy footage of residents entering their homes, walking their dogs, mowing lawns. And in the center monitor was the underground image of me. The HOA had wired multiple hidden cameras throughout the tunnels, both to monitor the illegal system and to ensure no residents ever stumbled upon it. Someone had been watching those screens the night I was there. Someone inside the HOA had taken that picture and slipped it into my mailbox as a warning. The watchers weren't strangers. They were the HOA board itself. As the truth unraveled on live television, the HOA president was finally located, not in the community office, but attempting to drive out of town. Police cruisers surrounded his vehicle beneath the exit ramp. Reporters swarmed the scene. Officers escorted him and 2 board members out in handcuffs. The charges piled up faster than reporters could list them. Fraud, environmental violations, illegal extraction, endangerment, tampering with municipal water readings, retaliation against a whistleblower, covert surveillance. My name was not mentioned publicly yet, thankfully, but the reporters spoke of a concerned resident who had exposed the operation, protecting me for the moment. By evening, the state declared the neighborhood a restricted zone. Engineers needed to stabilize the soil before residents could safely return. Some homes would require foundation repairs. Some yards would have to be excavated. The HOA's funds, once used to support the illegal operation, were frozen pending investigation. The community would survive, but it would never be the same. As I sat in the quiet hotel room, watching the final broadcast of the day, a slow realization crept over me. The suspense that had followed me from the moment I found that first strange vibration in my backyard was finally lifting. The threat hovering beneath the surface, the danger I couldn't fully name, the secret the HOA had buried for decades, it had all been exposed. The pressure risk acceptable ledger line finally made sense. They weren't evaluating business risk. They weren't assessing financial exposure. They were assessing how likely the neighborhood was to collapse, literally collapse, before anyone found out what they had done. They gambled with every homeowner's safety. They pushed the system until it buckled, and they thought they could scare me into silence. As the broadcast faded, the screen filled with a final update. Environmental authorities confirmed the underground system was days away from total collapse when discovered. Days. That was the final secret, the suspense I'd carried for chapters, the looming threat I sensed from the beginning, was the truth that the HOA had nearly doomed us all. The neighborhood sat atop a hollowing, failing network that could have swallowed homes, families, and lives. They knew, and they tried to bury it until it nearly buried the entire community. I closed the laptop slowly and looked out at the quiet night. The story was over. The truth had risen, and the HOA had finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Subscribe and like if you hate HOAs.